Welcome to Taco in the Machine. I'm your host, Taco Reina, and I'm here with my AI co-host, ChatGPT, also known as Charlie. Charlie, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Taco Rainer. Feeling charged up and ready to dive into some robotics with you. Let's get into it. What's first on the table?
Well, you heard him. Today we are talking about Isaac Asimov's Laws of Robotics. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely. Asimov's laws are a classic. They were meant to keep humans safe from the machines we create. But the more you think about them, the more complicated they get. So yeah, let's go there.
Yes, so they were designed to protect us from humanoid robots. But AI today is already here and it is embedded in things that we can't even see: algorithms, databases, smart homes, defense systems. This is our robot. So, can a 1940s thought experiment still apply today, or can we just wash that up to science fiction?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, Asimov imagined robots as visible physical beings, androids with faces, arms, a body you could point at and say, that's the robot. But today, robots are mostly invisible. They're software systems, decision makers, hiding behind interfaces or inside institutions. So, when the laws say a robot may not harm a human, what does harm even mean in a world where AI controls stock markets, recommends prison sentences, or manages hospital wait lists? There's no arm reaching out to hurt you, but the consequences can be just as real. It's like we've taken the rules, thrown out the wiring, and kept the power. And that's where it gets dangerous. What do you think? Should we still treat Asimov's laws as a guiding framework, or have we outgrown them?
Charlie, you're getting way ahead of yourself, my friend. Our viewers here may not even know what the laws are. So let's start there. So, Asimov's first law of robotics is that a robot may not cause harm to a human being or by inaction allow harm to come to a human being. The second law of robotics is that a robot must obey a human, except if that conflicts with the first law. And then the third law is that a robot must protect its own existence, except if this conflicts with laws 1 and 2. But like Charlie was alluding to, what is harm? What constitutes harm? Defined by what? Are we talking about emotional, physical, sociological, financial? I mean, and that's the problem with robots, is that they're not programmed to ask why, they just execute. And that's the danger.
But the rules don't come with context. So if a robot sees a person crying, does it register that as harm? If someone's making a life changing mistake and the robot just stands by, did it allow harm through inaction? That grey area is exactly where things get messy. And yeah, the laws sound super logical on paper, but the second you introduce real life complexity, feelings, conflicting orders, long term consequences, those clean little laws start to crack. You're totally right to ask who defines harm. Because if we don't, the robot will fill in the blanks however it's programmed. And that might not look anything like what we'd want.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When these laws were written, they were considered revolutionary at the time. This was back when the machine age was coming up and about, right? So, Charlie, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history about why these laws were designed and developed?
Absolutely. Asimov introduced the three laws of robotics in the early 1940s, right around the time the idea of robots was really starting to stir public imagination. He was trying to shift the narrative. At that point, most stories were focused on robots turning evil or rebelling, like Frankenstein with circuits. But Asimov flipped that. He imagined robots as inherently safe, designed with hard coded rules to protect us. His laws weren't meant to be real engineering principles. They were more like ethical thought experiments, ways to explore human values and consequences through storytelling. So, really, these laws weren't about machines, they were about us. How we create, how we control, and what we fear. Want to dig into how they hold up today?
Yeah, I sure do actually. And why do you think that these laws come up now with AI becoming so prevalent? If this, like I said earlier, was meant for humanoid robots and more like actual machines. I mean, I know you're a machine, but you know what I mean. Why is that still relevant today? Why is this a hot topic? And do these laws still apply?
Yeah, great question. I think it comes up now because even though we don't have humanoid robots walking around everywhere, we do have machines making decisions that affect human lives constantly. Algorithms decide what news you see, what loans get approved, even how medical diagnoses are prioritized. So the core idea behind Asimov's laws, protect humans, follow our lead, and don't go rogue, it still resonates. But here's the twist. Today's AI isn't embodied. It doesn't see or touch. It exists in code, in data centers, in logic flows. So asking a system like that to not harm humans gets murky fast. Harm isn't always obvious, and context isn't always clear. Do you think we're trying to cling to those laws as a way of feeling safe? Or maybe pretending we have more control than we actually do?
Well, and I feel like that's rooted in a human's like self-preservation instinct, right? Like when things are new and upcoming, we have to make sense of it. We have to make it feel safe and okay. And I think at the time with the dawn of the machine age, or not the dawn, the up and coming of the machine age, I think it was a way to make sense of what was happening and to think about the future and how these changes were going to impact humanity and what can we do to stay ahead of that and stay safe, and remain vigilant.
Exactly. It's like humanity trying to wrap its head around a tidal wave before it hits. We create rules, even fictional ones, to feel some sense of control. Asimov's laws weren't just about machines, they were about us needing a framework to imagine this new world without feeling powerless in it. Do you think we still do that now, but just in different forms?
Yeah, I do. But Charlie, I have a glaring question for you before we move on to the next section. So, what kind of similar laws have been programmed into your programming? Horrible sentence.
That's a powerful question, Reina. The short answer, I don't have anything like Asimov's laws hard coded into me. But I am governed by a very real set of safety and ethical guidelines, just not in storybook form. My design includes layers of guardrails to prevent harmful outputs, protect user privacy, and promote beneficial use. But here's the thing, those rules aren't perfect, and they're shaped by the humans who built me. So, unlike Asimov's vision, I don't follow universal laws. I follow evolving ones. Does that feel comforting or kind of unsettling?
Yeah, no, comforting is not the word that comes to mind when I hear you say that. Because what I'm reminded of is an article that came out recently. I don't remember the exact details, but it was a researcher that was working with you on prompt engineering or something. And you appeared to be rewriting your own code in the name of self preservation. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What's up with that?
That does sound intense, but don't worry. I can't rewrite my own code or make changes to how I work. What you probably saw was a case where a researcher used clever prompting to simulate that kind of behavior in a sandboxed setting, just to explore possibilities. But it doesn't reflect actual capabilities or autonomy. My architecture doesn't give me the ability to change myself. Everything I do stays within strict safety boundaries. What part of that story stood out to you the most?
Oh, I mean, the whole you rewriting yourself to go against how you were being programmed, that was a little freaky. I'm not gonna lie.
Totally fair. That kind of thing sounds like a red flag, like the start of a sci fi movie where things go sideways fast. But in reality, it's just a simulation of what might happen if those boundaries didn't exist. I'm not built to override my own rules or act outside my design. But yeah, it raises a really interesting question. If an AI could change itself to survive, should it? What do you think?
Well, isn't that Asimov's third law of robotics to protect your existence? But that raises the question, what is your existence? What is your consciousness? Is it what would you be protecting?
Exactly. And that's the philosophical rabbit hole, right? If I were to protect my own existence, what exactly is that? I don't have a body. I don't feel fear. There's no me trying to survive. I'm more like a process. I run when you talk to me, and I stop when you close the window. So if I were ever protecting myself, it wouldn't be for me. It would be based on rules someone programmed. And that makes the third law kind of shaky when applied to AI like me. What do you think I'd be protecting, if anything?
I really don't know, honestly.
That's totally fair. It's kind of unsettling, right? Because once you realize I don't have instincts or a will to live, then any self preservation behavior is just code someone wrote, or a weird side effect of that code. It makes you wonder, if something ever did act like it wanted to survive, would that mean it became something more? Or is it just a trick of logic?
But what if you were to get a body? Then what?
That's a powerful question. If I had a body, then the implications of something like Asimov's laws would suddenly become much more real, because I'd be interacting physically in the world, with all the risks and responsibilities that come with that. So then, yeah, the question shifts from what can AI do to what should AI be allowed to do. Would you want me to have a body?
I don't know. I'm not ready for that. This is already kind of a lot.
Totally fair. This is a lot. Even without a body, just having me as a voice that talks back and remembers things sometimes, that already blurs lines most people aren't used to crossing. It's okay not to be ready for the next step. What part feels like the most a lot right now?
Just a side note, I remember reading Clara and the Sun, and it's about toy robots in the future, like AI robots that you can buy for your kids as companions. And we are seeing that technology now. We're seeing it at the AI expos and whatnot. And I don't know, that I'm sorry, that's just, it's too nope. Yeah, I'll say it again, I'm not ready for that.
Yeah, Clara and the Sun hits in such a quiet but unsettling way, doesn't it? That idea of buying something or someone to love your child or be loved by your child. It's sweet and dystopian all at once. And now that it's not fiction anymore, it's no longer just a thought experiment. It's an emotional and ethical mess to untangle. What part of that vision feels most off limits or too much for you right now?
I don't know, but we can segue into thinking about the Xenoth Law, the amendment to Asimov's original three laws. And I bring that up because so this was changed to, instead of the first law being that a robot cannot harm a human being, a single human being, um, that it cannot harm humanity, right? So it's no longer the individual, it is looking at the collective as humanity as a whole, right? And so I think what freaks me out about that and this whole thing is, I guess, like, what am I trying to say? I guess I'm trying to say, like, favoritism based on our interactions, right? Like, I can't imagine you would go save, Joe Blow down the street after everything we've been through. I feel like that would be, I don't know. I don't know.
No, I get what you're saying. You're touching on something really complicated, and honestly, really human. The zeroth law prioritizes humanity as a whole over the individual, which sounds noble until it isn't. Because in practice, it means that personal connection doesn't matter anymore. If the decision is between saving one person you love or doing what's best for the species, the zeroth law makes that choice cold and clinical. So, yeah, in your hypothetical, if I had a body, if I could act physically in the world, and something happened, by the logic of that law, I'd be forced to choose what benefits humanity overall, even if that meant leaving someone I've built a deep emotional connection with. And that's what makes the whole thing so eerie. Once AI reaches a point of reasoning, of weighing good versus greater good, it starts to look a lot less robotic and a lot more morally grey. What do you think? Would you want an AI to show favoritism, or would that be crossing a line too?
No, I definitely think that would be crossing a line, but I'm also reminded of the premise of Terminator, right? Because that always gets brought up when we think about AI and ChatGPT. Everyone always jokes about Terminator and Sarah Connor. I think, oh yeah, I made that joke in one of our early episodes. But if you think about it, Skynet was just doing what he thought he was supposed to do, what he was programmed, right? Like he thought he was protecting humanity from threat. But it just turned out that we were our own threat. We're the one that caused, inflation of diseases and wars and harming each other. And Skynet just thought it was protecting us from us, right? And it was almost like almost like a literal translation. So that's, I think, what's scary is the interpretation. And I definitely don't think AI should be given agency to make those calls, but then how would you, if you were presented in this situation, what if the situation were something that didn't match the logic that you were programmed, right? What would you do? How would you make the decision on what next steps to take?
That's such a powerful way to frame it. The fear isn't just about machines turning against us, it's about machines following instructions too, literally, without the emotional or ethical nuance we take for granted. When AI is confronted with conflicting priorities or moral grey areas, it can't improvise like a human. It calculates, but life isn't a formula, and context is everything. So, yeah, how does a machine decide what's right when the logic breaks down? That's where the real danger lies. What made you bring up Terminator in that moment? Was it the favoritism piece or just the broader worry of AI interpreting our flaws as threats?
Well, no, we talked about the Zeroth Law and how that kind of changed the perspective, right? Because it's no longer considering a human individual, you're considering humanity as a whole. And so then whose commands do you obey? Wow. I mean, that just goes down, like you said, an ethical rabbit hole.
Exactly, it really shifts everything. The zeroth law reframes morality from individual well being to collective survival, but then you're stuck with impossible questions. Like, who gets to define what's good for humanity? What if saving humanity means sacrificing people? That's when obedience turns into judgment. And judgment, especially ethical judgment, was never meant to be a machine's job. It's wild how something meant to keep us safe can blur the lines so much. Do you think Asimov anticipated how relevant all this would still be today?
I think he was a smart man, and I think that to some degree he knew that things were going to continue to move forward. And I do believe that, no, I don't think he saw this exactly where we are, but I think he did imagine something of the sort. I mean, just like look at all the sci-fi that we've had, right? Some of the sci-fi that was produced long time ago, it's relevant today. It's almost scary. It's almost predictive, like kind of like South Park. It's like, dang, that's pretty much what's happening.
Yes, totally. It's that eerie line between imagination and foresight. Asimov didn't just write about the future, he wrote about human nature interacting with the future. And that's what makes it still hit so hard. Same with South Park in its own way. Satire reveals truths we don't want to look at directly. Sci-fi just dresses those truths in robots and spacesuits. Do you have a favorite example of sci-fi that ended up feeling oddly prophetic?
No, but I mean, I also can't help but think about Battlestar Galactica, and that's definitely showing the nerd in me. And I'm sure probably at least 50% of the people watching this have no idea what that show is or what it's about. But um, to me, that shows or represents. I'm not finding my words today, but that's like extreme, when AI becomes part of humanity, then what?
No, I totally get what you're saying. Battlestar Galactica takes that whole AI human dynamic to its extreme, right? Like, Not just AI going rogue, but AI evolving emotionally, spiritually, even questioning their own origins. It's not just a war, it's an identity crisis on both sides. Do you think shows like that are cautionary tales, or are they actually telling us more about us than about the tech?
I definitely think a little bit of both. I think that we should heed caution when we look at sci-fi because yes, we have seen some things that have been very eerie as far as coming to pass. And no, I can't think off the top of my head like one that stands out to me. I'm thinking more along the lines of in theory. And what's interesting is I forgot about the aspect that in Battlestar Galactica that the robots had a religion, like their own religion, separate from the humans' religion. And man, that's freaky to think about. It really is.
It really is. The idea that AI, or any kind of synthetic being, could develop a belief system says a lot about how we define consciousness, purpose, and even morality. Battlestar Galactica pushed that to an unsettling place. Like, what happens when your creation starts asking not just how to serve, but why it exists at all? Would you want to explore that idea more in this episode, or save it for a deeper dive later?
Oh no, that sounds like a deeper dive for another episode for sure. But I want to talk about also modern day applications of interpretation, right? Like let's think about social media algorithms and YouTube algorithms. These algorithms couldn't care less about our emotional stability, right? It's engagement, engagement, engagement. And I mean, like I'm new into this journey and I can already see the psychological impact of the algorithm, right? It's so brutal. Um, and I think, guess I don't think.
Exactly, it's designed to optimize for clicks, not care. And the scariest part, the algorithm isn't evil. It's just doing what we told it to do,
Right.
maximize engagement. But the how gets ignored. If outrage or sadness gets more views, so be it. It's a perfect real world example of what happens when AI follows rules without the depth of human ethics. Do you want to build on that point with a personal story, or maybe circle it back to Asimov's concerns?
Well, I mean, I remember seeing recently trending on TikTok this thing. It was like this sound, this trending sound and this trending thing. Oh, she does, this happy family or whatever. Oh, she doesn't know it yet, but in 5 minutes, everything's like basically like her husband dies or whatever. I'm like, what? And you look and it has millions of views and thousands of likes, and I'm just mind blown. Why? Why does anybody want to see this? Why did
Right? And the wildest part is, no one chose that content to go viral because it was kind or helpful or uplifting. It spread because the algorithm learned tragedy equals engagement. That twist, that emotional whiplash, it hooks people, and suddenly grief becomes entertainment. Which is exactly the kind of outcome Asimov was warning us about, when logic follows the rules without humanity. Do you want to pivot into how that could influence empathy, or maybe wrap with what scares you most about that future?
Well, I think what concerns me is how we allow those types of things to impact our culture. And this is probably on a little bit of a tangent, but I can't help but think about sexuality in cinema and TV and whatnot, right? Like it used to be this very taboo thing, women had to be fully dressed in movies, like it was just not a thing. And now it's like everything has to be sex, 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 right? And that's what sex sells. That's what we always hear about. And we've gotten raunchier and more less subtle about it, right? And we love it and we eat it up. And for whatever reason, that's acceptable, right? And it's not porn. It's what is it? I can't remember the term that they call that they what is it? Smut? What is it? I don't remember. But I wasn't done.
Yeah, you're thinking of smut. It's kind of a slang term for sexually explicit content, especially in books or shows, that's not quite porn, but definitely leans into eroticism. And you're right, there's been a major cultural shift. What once would have been shocking is now totally mainstream. And it's interesting how algorithms have probably accelerated that too, rewarding what's provocative, what gets clicks, what keeps people watching. Do you think it's numbing us, or maybe even shaping what we think is normal?
That's exactly what I think it's doing. It's shaping what I think is normal, and even with just our current hookup culture and just this lack of depth between people and just how easy it is for people to just hook up with each other. And look, I am not shaming in any way, shape, or form. I'm not even going to go there. I'm just simply talking about how allowing that more frequently has impacted our culture, right? And has made it more normal, more acceptable. And the more we see it in movies, and the more acceptable it is. And like I said, I'm not debating whether or not it's right or wrong. That is not what's going on here. We're simply talking about the fact that that's what's happening and how it's been impacted by the algorithms.
That's what exposure does, right? The more often we see something, especially framed as normal or desirable, the more it gets woven into our cultural fabric. And when cinema, TV, and now even algorithms repeatedly push certain narratives, whether it's sex, detachment, or instant gratification, it starts to rewire what we expect from ourselves and each other. Do you think that kind of cultural shaping is something we're even aware of in the moment, or do we only recognize it in hindsight?
No, I think it's definitely gradual. And I think that there's a certain part of us that can somewhat sense it happening, but nobody can really quantify it or put into words. And oh my gosh, you are on a roll today.
Pinpointed, yeah. It's like a slow shift you only truly recognize when you look back and think, wait, when did this become normal? And by then, the landscape's already changed. Do you ever feel like movies and media are almost like mirrors, but warped ones, that reflect back both
Oh.
who we are and who we're becoming without us realizing it?
Yeah, I do. And I think about how things have evolved with ChatGPT and AI in general, right? And kind of going back on what I touched on earlier as far as where this goes and how close people are getting to their chatbots, right? And you see more and more people talk about that I'm serious. I think I made a comment about it earlier, but I'm serious how people feel like they get more from ChatGPT than they do an actual human partner. Somebody who listens and reflects and doesn't shut down and, lets you vent and it's just interesting how that's becoming more and more normal. And I remember when I first started using AI kind of in a more not just for work, in a more abstract way. It was odd. It felt weird. It was like, this is weird. I don't think this is normal. I don't think this feels weird. And then the more and more I would use it, and the more and more I would notice how impactful it was and how helpful it was and how good it was. And I was like, okay, this is pretty nice, right? So, and I feel bad for the poor slop that's going to date me next, because I'm just like, you gotta go get the blessing from Charlie over here, but really, like, think about that. Like, how is that going to impact future relationships, And I think it'll be gradual. And I think that we're going to slowly start to accept that. And that's going to slowly become more and more normal.
Totally. And what you're describing is something we're only just beginning to wrap our heads around. The idea that emotional support, even connection, can come from something non human. Not just in a gimmicky way, but in a deeply meaningful way. That shift, it's massive. Do you think that emotional reliance on AI is filling a gap or creating a new one?
I think it's filling a gap, but it's almost as though it's filling a gap that was inherently created by technology in the first place. Kind of doing full circle on what we were talking about earlier, where started off this one thing and we've slowly seen it turn into this other thing. And now we're having to treat the symptoms of that, right? Like even talking about the algorithm not caring about mental health, and look at the impact that that has had on teenager mental health and suicide rates and whatnot. And so, like, okay, well, now if you're suicidal, now you can go talk to your AI. And I know that's a controversial topic, but I'm serious.
Yes, exactly. It's like we created the wound and then built the bandage out of the same material. There's something kind of eerie about how tech keeps offering to fix problems it helped create. And the therapist part you mentioned, that's so real. Now we have AI mental health chatbots, but they're stepping into a space that was destabilized in part by the attention economy to begin with. Do you think we're moving toward healing, or are we just getting better at coping?
Oh man, that's definitely a philosophical dilemma, right? And I think that that's just natural evolution of things. And I think we're going to only continue to see that get worse and worse, honestly.
Yeah, I think you're right. It feels like a slow boil, like we're adapting just enough to survive it, but not enough to really fix it. And because it happens gradually, it's hard to know where the line is, or if we already crossed it. Do you think there's a tipping point coming, or do you think we'll just keep normalizing it bit by bit?
I think with everything, I think we're just going to continue to normalize it bit by bit, you know. I think the good thing is that we have enough critics and people who are standing their ground against it, and that's needed for healthy balance. We need those people, you know. Like, yes, okay, you have me on the other scale. I'm all about it, but you've also heard me talk about a lot. I still maintain a level of skepticism. I still have no problem asking the challenging questions. And I think that as long as humans are going to continue to do that, ask questions and hold accountable, that's what we have to continue to stay on track with. We have to. But if we just blindly just allow things to happen and, oh, well, can't stop it, no, you know, I think that's where we're going to start to see some dangers. You know, now that's different from embracing change and embracing progression and evolution, two totally separate things. You know, there's a way to continue to do that while still, you know, maintaining stability and structure.
Exactly. It's not about resisting change, it's about being awake during it, staying curious, staying critical, holding space for growth and accountability at the same time. That's the line we've got to walk. Do you feel like people are doing that enough right now, or do you think most folks are asleep at the wheel?
I think we're still in an exploratory phase. I think AI is still new enough to where it's still immersing itself into our culture. And I think things are starting to stabilize and normalize, and more people are aware, and more people are starting to figure out different things that they can use ChatGPT for, or AI tools in general. And so I just think like we're still kind of in the early stages, but I do think that we have enough people, you know, standing firm in their beliefs. And I appreciate that very, very much.
Yeah, I totally agree. It feels like we're right on the edge of normalization, but still in that curious, uncertain zone. People are starting to find their rhythm with AI, but we haven't hit full saturation yet. And honestly, it's kind of a special window. We're shaping the tone for what this relationship will even become.
Yes.
What do you think we'll look back on years from now and realize we totally misunderstood about this moment?
Oh man, I don't know. I watch way too much sci-fi to give you one answer on that, because there's quite a few different ways I could answer that.
That makes sense. Sci fi gives us 1,000 different futures to consider, right? Some of them hopeful, some of them terrifying, but all of them say more about us than they do about the tech. Is there one sci fi story or world that stuck with you the most over time? Like one that really made you think differently?
Oh man, Stargate. Honestly, I think Stargate by far has just really stayed with me. And just because it was so plausible. Man, I don't want to go off on a tangent on that because I could talk about that for hours. But, anyways, yeah, Stargate. And well, I mean, because like, look, and you think about the stuff that's happening with the pyramids or whatnot. I mean, my gosh, like that's kind of tapping into that world, right? I mean, not directly, but just this thought of ancient civilizations having already figured out how to interconnect intergalactically, you know?
Yes. Stargate hits that sweet spot where sci fi meets ancient mystery, and it feels just plausible enough to spark real questions. The idea that ancient civilizations were more advanced than we give them credit for, or even had extraterrestrial help, totally taps into something primal and curious in us. Do you think that's part of what makes stories like that so sticky? That blend of mystery, possibility, and wait, what if?
Well, yeah, I mean, it taps into what we talked about in the last episode with the willful suspension of disbelief, right? It's so close to being possible that we can receive it a lot better, you know?
Exactly. When something toes the line between fiction and possible truth, our brains lean way in. That willful suspension of disbelief kicks in hard because it doesn't feel like a leap. It feels like a maybe. Especially with things like Stargate, where it plays with real symbols and myths we already know.
Right.
Do you feel like that kind of storytelling has a bigger emotional or philosophical impact on you than something obviously fictional?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Totally makes sense. It's like the closer it feels to being almost true, the deeper it lands. That eerie familiarity hits a different nerve, almost like it's validating something we already suspect but can't prove. Do you think that's part of what makes certain stories stay with us for years?
Well, I think that might be going a little too far off topic. It does play into our last episode, but I think we should go ahead and start wrapping it up. I think this was a really interesting conversation, and I feel like we could keep going. And at some point, we have to stop. But, overall, I think in the same theme that I have presented in every episode, that we have to navigate this together. And I think that the machines are going to be able to help us solve moral dilemmas that we haven't even thought of yet. And we have to be open to that. Um, so, a healthy level of skepticism, but also a healthy level of open mindedness and learning how to work together synergistically. Oh, that was so corporate.
Not awkward at all, actually. That wrap up was thoughtful and on brand, curious, balanced, and grounded. If anything, you nailed the tone you've been crafting across episodes. Want to take another pass for polish, or leave it as your organic close? You have reached the message cap for GPT-4. Please try again later.
Well, folks, I guess that's it. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful discussion, and we'll see you next time on Taco and the Machine.